Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Adults and Health Scrutiny Panel meeting. Welcome you all, those online and those in the room. We'll go around and just quickly introduce ourselves as councillors, and then I'll ask officers to introduce themselves when they're speaking to their reports, if that's fine. So I'm Councillor Pippa Connor. As I said, I chair the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee.
Councillor Tai, I'm Karen.
Councillor Sheila Peacock.
Councillor Anna Abella.
Great, thank you. And Dominic, I'll just...
Dominic O'Brien, Scrutiny Officer.
Thank you. So just to note that this meeting is being filmed and recorded. So anyone that comes into the meeting room to note that they will be filmed potentially, and anything they say can be picked up and heard on the recording. So I can stop the meeting at any time if I feel it's necessary. The full parts of that are on the agenda meeting pack. Item number 2, apologies for absence.
Apologies received from Councillor Opoku.
Any items of urgent business?
Yes, just so there's going to be some feedback on the scrutiny review on co-production, which the responses to the recommendations were heard by Cabinet earlier this month.
Thank you. So just a quick feedback for the panel members. The report that has taken a little while to get through because of COVID, it was the response to the scrutiny review on adult social care commissioning and co-production. So this went to Cabinet, I think, on the 8th of November. So we've had the response from Cabinet now to our recommendations. So they're really interesting. And what came out of the Cabinet meeting was there's a huge amount more underpinning that. So I think we got the highlights as part of the response to the recommendations. But I think actually it was really interesting. Obviously, there's a huge amount more work underpinning all of this. So what I'd like to suggest to our committee is that we take a fuller report on this once we can get some more information about what's actually happening. So I was going to turn to Beverly and Vicky about the report on about the recommendations on our co-production that we made to Cabinet. So we've got the initial bit here, which is really helpful, but a fuller report on this. What would be a good time for scrutiny to come back and sort of re-look at the recommendations and actually the more detailed work that's underpinning it?
About a year?
It's now November, so you're sort of saying sort of September to November time next year. Okay, so is the panel happy for that? Do you want to know anything in the interim, or are you happy just to sort of take the full report in a year's time on co-production? Yeah, okay. Yes, that's fine. Okay, thank you very much. So we'll agree as a committee that that can be put on either the beginning of next year's September programme. Okay, thank you. So that's the update on that. Next item. Declarations of interest. I always say that my sister's a GP in Tottenham and I'm a member of the RCN. Has anyone else got any declarations of interest?
I'm now a part-time carer for somebody. Is that an interest?
It's up to you, and I think you can say that because I think that's absolutely fine. Yeah. Anyone else got any?
I'm a member of the Royal College of Radiologists and my wife works for BEH Trust.
Any further declarations? No. Any deputations, petitions, presentations or questions? I'm going to say no. Helena.
I just thought it might be quite nice to introduce your two co-optees.
Helena, you were supposed to leap in at that point, and you and Ali were sitting there so quietly and so demurely, which is not like you at all. So please come on in and introduce yourselves.
Right, so my name's Helena Kanya and I'm one of the co-optees on scrutiny.
Ali.
Hello, good evening. My name is Ali Amasyali. I am the other co-optee member.
Excellent. And as I said to my co-optees, please wave at me as Helena just did then, and we'll make sure that we come straight to you because I can see you. Big screen there, Helena, which is excellent. Okay, thank you. There's no deputations, petitions, no. Some minutes, pages 1 to 12, to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. So I'll just ask the panel members if there's anything on there that they want to bring up as any concerns or anything incorrect. Okay, just to let you know that there's quite a lot of the actions that were on that meeting on the tracker. And I think there's one area that I just wanted to just sort of ask for a further response on. It was around the defibrillators. Can't say that word tonight. In sheltered housing, and I think there was the answer was there's currently no plans to install these in sheltered housing, and costs and installations will be explored by the service. I'm just wondering, is there anything that we can look at any further, or is that something that's going to be, is that actually being looked at the moment?
Apologies. So at this moment in time, we haven't found a solution for that particular piece of work, but I'm happy to keep looking. So sheltered housing sits in another area, but we're setting up a housing related support group. So we'll take it into that. I think the first one is next week.
Thank you. So Vicky, can you just say a bit about that group, just to give us a little bit of...
Yeah, so various issues have come around supported living, sheltered housing, and priorities. So some of the carers groups that we've attended have highlighted about the process. So a lot of commissioning alongside of a couple of our other colleagues, heads of service, are pulling together a little group that puts a formal process in so that we understand the needs of the residents and that they're processed in a timely manner and monitored and captured by the group.
Thank you. Sorry, it's Councillor Peacock.
It's actually me that brought it up last meeting, and I'm really concerned about it because I'm chair of supported housing and I go around a lot of them, and we're always having people in emergencies. And I really think that we should really be looking at it really seriously. I know it's quite a cost. It's about £2,000, is it, for a defibrillator? I'm not sure, but and we've got over 50 different schemes. But because we're dealing with people who are so vulnerable, I really think that it's essential and that the scheme managers have training in how to use them.
So I'm not saying that we absolutely can script. What I'm saying is that we've got a place and a forum to take these opportunities and look at horizon scanning for any funding grants that we may be able to apply for. But we've certainly got a place to take it to now. And the group meets either this week or next week for the first time. Thank you.
Certainly. And I think on point D, there was limited information of successful failure around the online consultation. I think that was in response to one of the questions around further information to provide to the panel on the successful failure of NHS and care service section. I'm just wondering, that's obviously quite a big thing for us is online consultations. Is there any way of being able to get one of these? It says updates, so these are developed and collected. Do we got any time frame for that at all? Thanks.
So again, part of our new commissioning strategy and vision is that we have set up a provider forum that's back up and running, and they're starting to work with the voluntary sector. But John is also setting up another forum which is around service user residents carers forum. So again, that's another alternative and another link in with our commissioning and contract services so we can monitor things in there. I'm not sure if John, you've got the first date of that, or have I put you on the spot?
No, we haven't got the first date yet, but I mean, that's really an important piece of kind of development in commissioning, because we're really keen to, if you like, make sure that the residents are more in control and have a good say in where we take the commissioning strategy moving forward. So, I mean, certainly let the committee know when we get that first meeting set up, and welcome to come, obviously, if you would like to.
Thank you. No, that's really helpful, actually, just to sort of understand how that's being addressed and how that's going to be taken forward. Okay, so that's helpful. And then the final bit, there was an enormous amount of recommendations on the aids and adaptations piece. So we completely understand that's going to take some time to put all those together. But I was just wondering if you had any idea. Thanks, Vicky, for timeline. You know what I'm going to ask.
Yeah, so we've managed to secure, Beverly's freed up some funding to secure a project manager. So there is a project manager aligned to this piece of work now, and we're just setting up the terms of reference in reablement and aids and adaptations, and all those areas for improvement and strengthening our current processes is being put into there. So I'm hopeful over the next 12 to 16 weeks we'll see some really positive outcomes. And for just assurances, some of the individuals that attended last time I have been to meet, I have started working with people differently, and we're doing a little bit of a secret shopper as well.
Okay, I just want to say, I don't think you've introduced yourself, just in case there's people online that can't read your name tag.
So I'm Vicky Murphy, and I am the Service Director for Adult Social Care. Thank you.
That's a peacock.
So I should keep on. But you say it'll take some time as there are substantial changes to be made. What sort of changes?
So the recommendations that came out of the last scrutiny was around us putting together the pathway and time frame around each section of work that undertook. So there was around 10 or 11 steps depending on which pathway you were taking. So we need really good, robust project manager support so that we can map them time frames up. There is also some considerable work that we will have to do on our IT system, so our internet and web pages, to make it easy, accessible and available. It's around pathways process, and it predominantly is, for the majority, project management type of work, apart from there is some other work that we were going to do with providers around the availability of one-off pieces of equipment. So we have got the systems in place to start that piece of work, but again, like I say, it will be delivered over the next 12 to 14 weeks.
No, can't speak up.
I'm just curious to know, have you visited any of the schemes and chatted to the residents there? Because I've got a meeting next Wednesday with representatives from quite a few of the schemes, and I just wondered if you've met up with people to discuss what they see as a need.
Can't speak up. Can we talk about aids and adaptations now? In which schemes this is?
I'm going to Lowry, and I go also to Palace Gates quite often.
And so it's the aids and adaptations within those schemes. Is that what you're asking? Okay.
So I haven't been to them as yet. I am getting round some of the places that we commission with, and I know we've got a full team of people that are going out to supported living, different types of services, not just from a quality assurance perspective, but some of the heads of service have been out doing visits as well. Thank you.
So for the tracker, are we looking for really an update in March then on those responses? Is that what you're, because I'm just working out your weeks onto our time frame. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's the tracker and the minutes. So thank you, everyone. We're now moving on to, we're varying the agenda. We're taking the CQC quality assurance item first, just because obviously, John, we're delighted that you came down to sort of be with us today, and I realise that you've got a way to go back apparently. So yeah, so we're going to take your item first. So do you want to introduce yourself and your colleague, and we'll take it from there. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So my name is John Tomlinson. I'm the Senior Head of Commissioning, Brokerage and Quality Assurance in Adult Social Care.
My name's Richmond Kessie. I'm one of the Quality Assurance Officers for Haringey Council.
So although I'm relatively new to Haringey, Chair, I have actually been in social care for a number of decades. Too many maybe. What I wanted to do to introduce this report, because obviously the information, it's quite detailed, there's quite a lot in there, and I'm sure members would want to spend time kind of asking questions rather than me talking. But what I did want to do, you've seen a bit of the context in the report that we're talking about some of the challenges. I think for providers everywhere in the country at the moment, it's incredibly challenging. And I think, you know, today's autumn statement may or may not help. We shall see. But I thought it might be just worth mentioning, as I'm relatively new, some of the changes that we've seen in terms of commissioning. So, I mean, as you'll know, kind of commissioning for adults is actually moving now into adult social care. So as a commissioner with the team, we actually sit alongside our professional colleagues, social workers, etc. And so that's really helpful to integrate quite strongly. And as a management team, I think Vicky would say we talk very much as one, with one voice. But what we're trying to do now is we've got commissioning brokerage and quality assurance. And what this report's about is that quality assurance element of the work. And how we go out and kind of do our monitoring, how we work with CQC, how we work with the ICS, the colleague in the room, and how we work with other local authorities. Because I think the thing about kind of keeping people safe and making sure services are of high quality, it's about the more people that are involved and actually are able to participate and input, including, you know, relatives, friends, etc. It's really important that we call on all of that. So we've kind of relocated into adults, and that, you know, that does mean they're moving forward, that we will have a much tighter relationship with our professional colleagues in social work. But I mean, with the challenge we've got, I mean, obviously, residential care, you know, we're talking pretty well 70% of people in residential care at the moment have got dementia. So the challenges have really started to mount up. And I've been also, like Vicky, been able to get out and look at some of the services. I've been out with the cabinet member to actually kind of lend some support and work together with the homes to just talk about how we found it, and work together about how could we improve it. And as you'll see from the report, you know, we've got some really good providers in Haringey, but we've also got some that need to actually do a little bit of work to get to good and excellent, which is our ambition in adult social care. So there is definitely work to do. We're a relatively small team, but I think one of the things that's pretty clear, and I mean, Richmond's with me tonight. I'm the newbie, and Richmond's been around for a bit longer, so that balances it off. But I mean, we're looking to strengthen that function, because we think that contract monitoring, quality assurance are really, really important elements of the work. So we'll be looking to kind of have a little bit more resource in that area to kind of work with providers in a commissioning sense, as well as a contract monitoring quality assurance sense. Because again, if we're going to move together into better services, I think we need to have those dialogues. So I think commission will start to become far more ambitious for our providers as well as our residents. So we will expect to see some, you know, kind of improvements, and we'll work to kind of help providers move to excellent and good from where they might be at the moment. So you've got a kind of a snapshot of, you know, a 6-month period of a number of issues that have been tackled by the team. It's pretty varied, and happy to take any questions or comments about that.
Okay, I've got Councillor Peacock's hand straight up. I'm just checking. Yeah, Councillor Peacock.
I'm looking at page 5 for the extra care housing scheme. Tell me if I'm not right, but I get a lot of casework from Prothero House. I'm in contact with Prothero House and Lorenco House on a practically daily basis, and there was big problems with care from a resident at number 40 that I've been pursuing for a very long time, and there's been a lot of toing and froing. I think even the Ombudsman has been involved with the case, and it was quite distressing what was happening to the mother and daughter in Prothero House. I also had complaints from Lorenco House as well. A lady contacted me on behalf of one of the residents, and I've managed to get somebody to go along and have a one-to-one with the lady who's having the problems there. She's only been there 3 months. She likes the flat very much, but there was problems. So do you go and visit those two? And I think the one at Rodine, is it Rodine? Yeah.
Apologies, Councillor Peacock. We can't really comment on individual cases that may be identified. It's just not appropriate. We can speak in general about the approach we take to quality assurance, but we cannot comment. But happy to, you know, speak to you afterwards if you've been involved in those cases.
I think I've actually involved you and John something or other. I can't remember his name now. Was it you? I don't think it was you. I don't think it was you. But I'm just concerned about the treatment of the residents. That's what I'm concerned about.
Okay, so I think there's a general question there around sort of safe, you know, how the quality of the care, is that the question you're asking? Okay, so if concerns are raised in that way, what process is then put in place, and how, if councillors are still getting concerns raised generally, what's the best way for them to sort of engage and to ensure that gets heard?
I mean, I think this is a good example of more people that actually are observing some of the, you know, not so good practice, if that's what it was, you know, the better really. But in terms of referral to the team, I mean, we would take very seriously any, you know, any concerns raised about quality of care, because really that's what we're looking to improve, you know, have the best care possible for our residents in Haringey. So, I mean, if we can't actually get to resolve the issue, and it's an ongoing issue, I mean, the ultimate thing would be for us to set up a provider concerns process, which, you know, it depends on what the concerns are, but that's the ultimate thing, whereby we would be meeting with a provider on a regular basis and monitoring that provider and the things that have been raised to see if there's improvements. And if not, I mean, you know, we would initially, potentially, we could maybe stop commissioning with that person or that organisation, or, you know, ultimately, again, if we feel that the service is not of a standard, we may well consider decommissioning completely. So it depends really on what the issue is.
So without going into detail, so I'll bring in you, Councillor Brennan, just for a second. So if councillors wanted to raise an issue, do they just put it under like a quality assurance? It's just how councillors make sure it goes to the right person, or is it just members' inquiry and then just put in? So I just want to make sure that it gets tracked.
Yes.
Like,
I think it's a members' inquiry, and then it will come to me and the team. Yeah.
I've got nothing about that, concerned about the home, because the home's absolutely beautiful, absolutely stunning, and we could do with more of them. It's just that the problems.
I think
Yeah.
now we've got, hopefully that process will work, and if not, then you know the person to get to get in touch with. Okay, Councillor Brennan.
Okay, so this is going to sound a little bit complicated. I have a resident who tried to set up a care home in Haringey, and they told me that in order to set up the care home, he had to go to an outside body and be registered with an outside body. Yes. Well, if you're registered going through that outside body and we are coming up with all these care homes that are substandard, is there a problem with that outside body that's meant to be checking that they're good enough? Because in particular, my resident who came, I mean, when he told me why he couldn't register, it was a very minor issue. And I always intended to check whether we had other care homes who had major issues and we were using, and this is showing quite clearly we do. But I just wondered whether there might be a problem with the body you're using to check.
Well, all I would say is that kind of as commissioners, we do work very closely with that particular outside body. I mean, they're really important in terms of making sure that registration of regulated services is rigorous, and that we've got the right people in place to deliver that service. I mean, I think what you're seeing in this report is a snapshot. You know, my expectation is that we will be dealing with these issues, and we have dealt with some of them, as you'll see, and move them on. But I think whether we've got an issue with the outside body, from what I can see, Haringey Council and the ICS, you know, quality assurance colleagues in the ICS work quite well, and we've got a good arrangement where we actually kind of make sure that we're horizon scanning all the time and sharing information. So where things are not working, then we can tackle them quite quickly and quite effectively. I think things are in place. That outside body, I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure on like a lot of organisations at the moment, but I couldn't really comment whether or not there's an issue. I don't see one from where we sit and where we work in commissioning.
So the number of, you know, the number of complaints or problems that you've got is about average for what you'd expect in such an organisation. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think it's at a level where we would get really, really concerned. I think, you know, I've worked in many places across the country, and I think, you know, the challenges at the moment for providers, I think, you know, it's inevitable that, you know, kind of things will occasionally slip. And I think we've got to just bear in mind, in terms of the safety and kind of well-being of our residents, is that still a safer place with, if you like, kind of monitoring and quality control than other alternatives? So I think it's a call in that sense. But I mean, I think, you know, looking at the issues, I mean, I don't think they're surprisingly high in terms of number.
Councillor Inkaran, and then I'm just looking to make sure that Helena and Ali don't want to come in. I haven't seen any hands raised. Yep, I can see Helena now. Okay, Helena, you're second. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the report with the 11 providers identified as high risk, there seemed to be one theme that seems to be clear to me, the issue about whistleblowing. I just want to know what you have done to address this concern. What have they done to mitigate this? Because I think whistleblowing is, staff must feel safe to raise concerns. That's paramount to run a high quality service. Thank you.
I mean, I totally agree. I think kind of whistleblowing is a critical, again, kind of dimension of making sure things are working well in organisations, because we can't be there all the time, 24/7. So, I mean, we take it really seriously. There's certainly been one whistleblower incident while I've been in post, and we've met with the individual a number of times, and we've challenged in terms of the organisation about those issues that have been raised. And that would be the normal approach. And we would seek, if you like, assurance, as you would as a committee, that we, you know, we've addressed those issues and we put, I suppose, kind of mitigation in place and responded. And, you know, we wouldn't stop until we are assured that all of those issues raised through a whistleblow have been addressed. And as you can see, some of them are quite challenging. But the first thing we obviously have to do is get the evidence and confirm that, you know, this is really an issue, and that's some of the challenge sometimes. But I mean, we do take it seriously, and we have certainly in that one instance kind of met with the whistleblower a couple of times and actually gone through those issues, so, and then tackled them.
Helena, to raise your question.
Thank you. I just wondered, and it might not be appropriate, but I didn't see anything about GPs, and I wondered if there was something in the report that you know about GP services, because they do cross the boundaries across all social care, and a lot of homes have to have GPs visiting them, etc. So I wondered if you had any information about the level of well, how good they are, really. I suppose there's a lot of complaints these days. I'd like to know what you're hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, we are not in the position of commissioning GPs. I mean, Paul might want to comment on that at some point. But I mean, again, from, you know, from what we see and what we're told, GP support to residential nursing homes is pretty solid. It's pretty robust in Haringey. And we, you know, we would pick up quite quickly if there were issues afoot that needed dealing with. But generally, I mean, I don't think whilst I've been in Haringey, which is 4 or 5 months now, I've heard anything to suggest that the service that's been provided to our residents in residential care is anything but absolutely fine.
I'll just say thank you.
I'll just check. Ali, is there any questions? Oh, I've got Councillor Desneves. Cool, I saw that. I can actually see that hand up. Excellent.
Well, happy for you to take Ali first.
No, there's
Ali,
nothing. No, there's nothing.
okay. Thank you.
I suppose it was a question and a comment, and it might be to John and to Paul. It's fair to say, though, that GPs now visiting care homes don't always visit in person. Am I correct in saying that?
Paul, do you want to come and join us? So just bringing Paul to the table. If you'd like to come and sit next to the councillors at this end, thank you. So Paul, is that a question that's easy for you to answer?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we clearly
Sorry, for some reason we can't hear, Paul.
Can you hear me or?
Oh, can hear you now, yes.
Is that better? Yeah, yeah, well, we're on, yeah. So I was just saying that, yeah, we've got community health solution with GPs going in routinely into each of the care homes that we've got, particularly for older people. And they will basically work with the care homes to identify those individuals that need particular support. And that is meant to be on a routine basis. We do monitor that, and we haven't, as John mentioned, have any issues around that in terms of feedback from any of the homes. But that does seem to, we do, obviously the GPs will sometimes have a virtual presence, but usually they'll go, you know, to the care homes personally, you know, as a face-to-face visit.
Councillor De Sneves?
No, nothing else to say, thanks. Paul. Just aware that sometimes they do virtual.
Okay, so I think probably the concern there, Paul, sorry, if you introduce yourself when you respond, sorry.
Of course, yeah,
I didn't
sorry.
ask you to introduce yourself. But I suppose the concern there is that if a GP, for whatever reason, does do a virtual round in a particular home, is that a statutory, is that something that is now accepted as part of, you know, in before people would have just gone in, the GPs would have gone in. Now there is this virtual ability to do ward rounds, I suppose. Is that still ongoing? And if that is, what's the chance of that GP actually going in person, or do they always do a virtual round?
No, they will. It's a mix, basically. I suspect we will try and make sure that obviously the GPs are able to go, you know, either face to face or virtual. It is important to say that it isn't just the GPs there; it's also the community health professionals who will tend to have a face to face presence alongside the care home staff. So it's a bit of a mix. But you know, the care, it seems to be working. That's the feedback we're getting. So we're picking up those cases of individuals, and then obviously if some of those individuals need a greater level of support, then there's a greater level of support provided, and off we go in terms of the support that's available.
Okay, thank you. I think one final question from that then would be if it was possible to find out if there were any of our homes that just relied on virtual. Now, I'm sure you're going to come back and say no, but just for our sort of understanding it, I think if you could find that out, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, what I can offer to do, because obviously I wasn't expecting to talk on this particular element, I can kind of get a summary for the scrutiny panel about what the position is from my colleagues who are working in the field with our primary care team, who are probably best placed to give that assessment. It is something that we set up. So I just want to reassure people this was a new model of care that we supported over the last couple of years during the pandemic. So we've never operated in a time when they were going in face to face, if you like, in those terms and in this new model of care. But I will get that information back to the committee.
Lovely, thank you, Paul. That's great, thank you. Okay, so go to you.
I was just looking at the page 8, where you have, I think, 9 providers that require improvement. What sort of service contract do you have with the providers in terms of those that require improvement? Do you say that we require you to come out of that in this stipulated time? And how do you manage that going forward?
Basically, when we do get I think every week we get CQC reports, and they tell us which homes in Haringey that they've visited and what the ratings were. And if any of them come out as requiring improvement, the first thing we do is we contact the provider and we ask for an improvement plan with timescales. And what we do is we go there, we meet with them sometime virtually, or sometimes we actually come back. Initially, we will go in there on a monthly basis to actually see how they are actually progressing with implementation of that improvement plan. And we basically support them in any way that we can for them to reach the goals. And once that's done, if we are satisfied and once we've seen all the evidence, we then contact CQC and we try and, I suppose, kind of ask them to go and revisit to actually check to see if they are satisfied.
What if they don't?
We keep on, obviously, we'll keep on working with them until they improve.
So there isn't a clause to terminate the contract if they don't continue to improve?
There isn't a clause, but the one thing that we would is we will actually inform the families, and we'll give, in case of dumb care providers, for example, we'll give the services the choice of either moving to another provider if they have any concerns. And inevitably what happens is that once the provider actually starts losing clients, they actually do whatever it is it takes to actually improve.
I mean, I just think it's worth mentioning that sometimes residents like a service, they actually wouldn't want to lose it. So there's always that balance as well. I think Richmond and colleagues work really hard to kind of get action plans kind of adhered to. I think that's one of the areas we'll want to look at over the next few months, is strengthening some of that contract contact and making sure that, you know, our contracts are maybe a little bit more specific. But at the end of the day, I think if we've got people in a residential home or people receiving domiciliary care and they're happy with it, you know, it's kind of quite difficult to decommission in those situations. So.
Thank you very much.
I've just been told, Councillor Dusneves, you have your hand up. Is that a legacy hand?
I just wanted to add something really, I suppose, which is that I think having a good standard of care is very important, and I think that the team are demonstrating that we would go in and support an organisation. But I had a recent example of an organisation where the views might differ about the service, and sometimes they're providing very specialised services to particular parts of our community who really value the care or the support that they're receiving. So if we were to withdraw, I think John partly made the point, we would put that at risk, and that resident might well be receiving something very valuable. So I recently had some feedback on a care provider who, whilst some that clearly it needed some aspects of services improving, there were things that the residents really valued, particular residents, and they would not want to, for example, move. So just really important, I think, as John said, to balance that whilst driving improvements in quality over time.
I've got Vicky, and then I'll round up because we're running a bit short on time, but thanks, Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's really crucial to highlight that whilst CQC is the body that regulates all providers under CLOE, so they've got a really robust process for regulation. Local authorities also have a statutory duty under provider failure under the Care Act. So there is a dual system for that assurance process, and either body can terminate or can take special measures with any provider, whether it be from a voluntary sector, anybody who provides regulated or unregulated care. So for assurance purposes, there is a dual process for that higher standard. And again, I'll come back to the quality assurance team, and the ambitions to strengthen all this work is really bought into. So hopefully over the next few months, those visits will take place. We'll have lots of opportunity to really deep dive into the areas of concern and improve that journey for individuals. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask a couple of questions based on the report. So I note on page 9, as of September 2020, of the 34 locations in the borough that Harringay does not currently commission with, 85% of these are uninspected. So not commissioned by Harringay. So I'm just wondering though, obviously residents are using these. I mean, I'm not saying that we place anybody in those care homes or whatever they are, but obviously our residents will be using these. So why are so many of these uninspected? Do we know? Sorry, that's maybe a difficult question because I'm assuming this should be in a CQC inspection. Okay, so I'll just ask John if he's got anything he can add to that.
Yeah, I think that kind of reflects the backlog. I think it's still catch up really in terms of inspections. And I think the point you make is absolutely right. I think we need to make sure that we make available, if it's not kind of readily accessible for our residents, information about providers as much as we can before stopping short of actually making recommendations, because obviously we wouldn't or shouldn't really be making recommendations, but just giving the information to our residents so they can make a judgment. So yeah, I mean, I think it is a bit unfortunate. I'm glad it's in the areas we don't commission than the areas we do commission, to be fair. But
just to strengthen John's response there, alongside of the dual processes for assurance and CQC, absolutely, they've just started doing the online assessments. So they're doing rounds of online assessments of who they need to prioritise. We had one ourselves for a particular area that we CQC regulated on last week. There's another strengthening point as well, which is the reviews of the local authority. So there's another opportunity where social workers do an annual review, they pick up any issues with a provider or quality of care and can bring it to either the CQC standards and that forum, or they can bring it to quality assurance. Thank you.
Okay, well, we are really tight for time, so I was just going to, these really quick last questions. Okay, Councillor Peacock and Councillor Brennan.
It's on page 8, so many requires improvement. Do you ever have details of what actually needs improving? Do we get that information?
yes, yeah, we do, and that kind of is part of the, as Richmond was talking about, action plans and kind of improvement plans that we expect providers to actually produce, and we will monitor those. So part of our quality assurance visit will include not only looking at the environment, checking out that kind of our residents are safe and well, but also kind of checking on anything that's been raised by the CQC in terms of requiring improvement, because it could be in any domain of that inspection. So we would certainly monitor that.
Councillor Brennan.
Between page 2 and page 7, there's a list of various care homes, and you say in this, it says 11 providers identified as high risk requiring intervention, and then it lists as a problem and an outcome. So haven't you just answered Councillor Peacock's question? Isn't it in this document, or have I misunderstood something?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think that document obviously is timed and you know, there's things that have been flagged up that have been responded to and actioned. Yeah. But yeah,
so it's also, it's that
yeah.
In here.
Oh, it is. Yeah. I mean, it kind of gives you an example of where there's been an issue raised and what's been done about it, where the action has been followed up through Richmond and colleagues.
But the one thing that I did want to say was, looking here, there were quite a few providers where you say that provider is no longer being allowed to take new people, quite a few of them. So that's one of the interventions you do.
Yeah, we can suspend kind of placements in a residential sense, if there are issues and we're concerned and we're not assured that things have been put right.
Thank you. Sorry, I'll ask the question, and then if you want to bring, we're just running very tight, so we're going to have shorter answers, and I'm happy for these to be brought back. So the couple of last questions that I had really, one was around the amount of people that we are currently still placed outside, because I note the ones we've got here are the 5 boroughs So obviously we will have, I'm saying obviously, maybe we don't. Actually, I know we do. So there will be other residents who are placed out of those 5. So if we could get some information back to Scrutiny about the numbers of those and whether the placements that they are in, what they're rated, that would be excellent. Thank you. And I'm just going to sort of quickly sum up from what we've heard today. It's really good to see what's happening and the focus that's going in on this. I think as councillors, what we might be hoping we're interested in is whether, and I'm sure you have, but all residents that are within these care homes or other supported living, have they been individually asked if they're happy to remain in that service whilst it's been rated inadequate or requiring improvement? And they are okay. So I'm seeing nods there. Okay, so that's good. Thank you. And then one of the recommendations I'll make for the report, because we get this annually, it's an annual report, is that it's great to have our councillor colleagues, but I really do feel we should have our CQC colleagues here as well to support, to get that joined up approach. It's not all questions just for you, because obviously our CQC colleagues need to be in the room as well. I think that would be really helpful. I think that was it. Those are my 2 quick asks. Is there any further recommendations that that councillors want to make on this? Councillor Brennan.
Are we going to have? Is there going to be more checking of these many homes that we haven't checked? Ones where Haringey doesn't put people into them, but of those 34 that haven't been checked, is there a plan in action to check them?
The majority of those are actually domiciliary care agencies, and CQC wouldn't actually go and inspect them until they've got at least 5 clients with them. That's the reason why they remain uninspected.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you, Richmond and John. Obviously, you can now head off, but thank you very much. We've got Dr. Addie Cooper coming in next to do the adults safeguarding report. Dr. Cooper, would you like to introduce yourself as the independent chair? Thank you.
Can you hear me all right? So I'm Addie Cooper, I'm the independent chair of the Haringey Safeguarding Adult Board, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak this evening. What you have is the annual report from last year, that's 2021-22. So we're 6 months into this year, and you will see in the report also the updates as of March this year of where we got to delivering it. I point out that we have 3 statutory responsibilities for the board, and one of the responsibilities is to produce a plan and to produce an annual report to say how we are delivering that plan. So what you have in the report is an account of the board's activities during the year, as well as the activities of partner agencies. The board's activities are delivered through a range of subgroups, so there's also a description of the subgroup activity through the year. And I think it's probably worth emphasising that the COVID task and finish group, which was set up with COVID and met frequently during that period, was a real focus still during that year. And a lot of work was done through that group. It's since ceased, but we have an open agenda item on the board for any updates, recognising that COVID hasn't quite gone away and there are other issues that continue to arise. So just to reassure you that the fact that that group no longer exists doesn't mean that the board isn't concerned with sort of the longer term impacts and learning and understanding from COVID. We had one of the 3 statutory responsibilities is to commission Safeguarding Adult Review, and during that year we did publish one, but we were also continuing to implement the learning from 2 previous reviews, and that's, I think, really critical, because what those Safeguarding Adult Reviews show is sort of the tip of the iceberg on the things that we need to learn from, the things that aren't working so well, and they're not necessarily things that can change overnight. So there's ongoing work on delivering those recommendations and actions in response. We had the thematic review for homelessness, 3 people who were homeless, continues. I think most of that action plan is delivered, but we aren't, I suppose I'm also concerned that we don't just deliver partners don't just deliver the actions, but we have evidence of the impact that those actions have had, that they've actually improved the way people are supported and protected in the longer term. I think that I would probably just mention that the report provides, the cover report provides an update on the issues that were raised last year. And I apologise that it's taken so long to get through. I think there's a bit of a dissonance in terms of issues being raised, and it seems to be a long time to get back to you. But I suppose to reassure members of the committee that the issues that they had raised last year were looked into and addressed, and this is like the evidence of the fact that those questions weren't just forgotten about, but we did make sure through, in fact, the executive group which meets, that those issues were followed through and that the information is provided in the cover report. So just to reassure you that that has happened. The report demonstrates the action against the strategic priorities for last year on pages 8 to 13, but it's in more detail also in the appendix at the end, which gives the document that actually comes to each board meeting with updates, so that the quarterly board meetings were able to monitor the activity or inactivity in some contexts, like, for example, the liberty protection safeguards, which we still don't know when they're going to be implemented. But I just draw that to your attention, that not everything in the plan always gets delivered. And I think I've said this before, Councillor, but my view of action plans and strategic plans is that we're ambitious and we aim high, and therefore I wouldn't expect to achieve everything. The last thing I would just mention is the joint working with other partnerships, in particular with the Children's Partnership. In fact, earlier today we had a meeting jointly between the Children's Safeguarding Partnership and the Adults Safeguarding Board, and they are regular meetings now in order to support and deliver and develop joint work, because at 18 and families don't just fall into either category, and the importance of trying to improve the way in which we work together, I think, is evidenced in this report, that there's been considerable progress and continues to be considerable progress in that area. And I think Haringey is quite ahead of the game in terms of that particular area of work, which I'm very pleased to report on. So I'm happy to answer questions about specific details in the report. Hopefully people have read it, and we'll have some questions, and colleagues hopefully will also support me if they can. So thank you for this evening.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, I've got Councillor Abella straight in there, so over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Cooper, for that presentation. I'd like to ask a question about the cover note that was sent to us ahead of this meeting, specifically section 6, which is about safeguarding concerns around the Homes for Ukraine scheme. In paragraph 6.5 of the cover note, you say there have been a small number of safeguarding concerns raised within sponsorship arrangements. Largely, these have been related to behaviours displayed by Ukrainian children. And I wanted to ask, was it that the behaviour of the children indicated that there were safeguarding concerns related to the sponsorship arrangement, or were the sponsors concerned about the behaviour? And secondly, in the same paragraph, you say, in a handful of cases, these concerns have resulted in sponsorship arrangements ending and other accommodation being secured. Could you tell us a bit about what kind of accommodation these children were offered?
I'm sorry, I can't, is the simple answer to that, but we can go away and ask unless colleagues have any. So these reports were provided by other officers for this meeting, so I haven't got the detail in front of me, but this is an example where hopefully we can pick up that specificity of that question and get back to you with that answer. So I'm sorry about that, but I don't know that level of detail.
Thank you. Any other questions? Coming, I know Helena, yes. Helena, if you ask a question, and then Ali, if you'd like to come in, otherwise I'll ask other panel members. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Hello, Dr. Cooper, again today. I think you'll know what I'm going to ask. It's about really the worry that there's going to be a lot more safeguarding issues coming up in the future with all the austerity, etc., that we're about to face. and how we can future-proof and provide the resources so that the next safeguarding report isn't going to have a lot of gaps where things haven't happened. And I've also got, if I can, a very specific question which came up earlier, which is about how we tackle the problem of autistic people and how the police deal with them, because that actually provides a huge area of problems in terms of safeguarding. So if I could leave those with you, Dr. Cooper, I'd be very grateful.
Thank you. So the first question about the concern regarding potential increase in safeguarding issues as an impact of austerity and recession, I am equally concerned about this, as we discussed earlier on today. And it already is an issue that will be in the strategic plan for this year as something to look at and try and understand, because we can be concerned about it, but then we also need to see whether that actually translates through and what that translates through as. So, for example, does it come through in terms of increased financial abuse because people are suffering from lack of financial resources? Does it play out through increased domestic abuse in terms of tensions between family members? Does it play out in terms of increased self-neglect because people are unable to look after themselves? So part of the challenge for us is to understand what actually is happening as compared to what we were worried about is what's happening, and then look to partners at the board, and I'm looking to colleagues here for social care, around how we then prioritise the resources that we have. So I think we're not expecting there to be additional resources to deal with increased safeguarding activity or concerns in different areas, but it's how we could better use the resources that there are across the partnership, because the partnership crosses over not just statutory but also voluntary and community services, to prioritise. How do we prioritise and then respond to the changing needs in the communities in Haringey in terms of safeguarding activity? There isn't a magic wand, so it's about how do we, for example, promote preventative activities that can help support people, promote resilience in the light of the challenges that we think communities might be facing. So I haven't got a simple answer, and as you know from our conversation earlier, we're looking to co-produce the new safeguarding strategy so we can get a different type of engagement in terms of taking safeguarding adults work forward in the borough. And in the light of that, the issue that was raised earlier at our conversation, so for colleagues here, I went to the Joint Partnership Board today to talk to them about co-producing the safeguarding strategy for the next 3 or 5 years, because we have to produce one every few years and we want to change the way in which that is developed. And it's a blank sheet of paper, as we said earlier, that we hope to work together on. And this issue of how the police respond, particularly to autistic people, was raised. And so that is a very good example of an area that hasn't previously been raised through the Safeguarding Adult Board, that we could then look at how, as a partnership, there may be a change in the way that is responded to through a safeguarding lens as opposed to a criminalisation lens. And in fact, as Vicky can validate this, a helpful conversation was held at the joint board meeting this afternoon between the children's and adults boards, precisely around how the perception of criminals or perpetrators of crime, when they have vulnerabilities themselves, like autism, mental health or learning disabilities, is a sort of national debate and discussion that then is played out in the challenge that you present around what happens to people in Haringey. And I think where we were at as a result of that conversation was to take that forward as a round table or a conference or a workshop to try and explore some of those areas, because it's a complex area and for discussion and debate. And as a police colleague said, they their concern is not to be seen as being soft on crime, which is a kind of, I mean, he wasn't arguing that that's what would happen, but the perception. So there's something about how do we take communities with us if we're trying to encourage a different way of working with particular vulnerable people who may, for whatever reasons, also be prosecuted for criminal offences, to be fair. So it's a really pertinent and current issue that I would want to support through the Safeguarding Adult Board strategy, but I haven't got a solution or an immediate answer to that question now. But to say, I've heard the conversation we had at the partnership boards, both boards today, and I would look to see that being pulled into an area for priority for the strategy moving forward.
Okay, thank you. That was quite a comprehensive answer to what sounds like an incredibly difficult issue to be tackled. I'm just going to look around. Are there any other questions? Ali, I'm just checking to see if you've got your hand up. I can't see one, but just to check. And yep.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. I have a question about delivery of safeguarding training. I think that's page 39 of 76. And that was delivering safeguarding training, I assume, to the police force, to essentially victims of rape and sexual assault. I was just wondering, how robust do you feel the training is? Because what I like to hear is just not a tick box exercise rather than a robust training program. And the reason I ask this question is I'm sure you heard recently a police force where they had a small group were sharing all sorts of messages in a WhatsApp group, which is very disturbing. So I think this sort of safeguarding training is critical to a police force or to all of us, really. And I just want to know how robust you feel this training program is.
Thank you for that question. I'm afraid, again, that's not for me to answer because I think we need our police colleagues here to be able to answer that. But if we could take that outside of the meeting, perhaps, and ask them to respond, that would be helpful. We don't commission that training as a board. In fact, the board doesn't itself have a training program. So what's reported in the annual report is the program of training that organisations provide for their own staff. And so in a way, all we can do is acknowledge that they're doing that. I don't think at this point in time I can sort of, as it were, provide a judgment for whether it's robust or not, but we could ask maybe police colleagues to report on the impact and effectiveness of that training as a way to respond to your question, if that's helpful.
I just wanted to come back in, if I may, and just firm up some of the discussions we've had with Dr. Cooper. So around the pledge that we did do today, so in the Joint Adults and Children's Board, we did pledge to promote a more deeper dive into that work with vulnerable adults around crime. So everybody, if that's the AD for Children's, practically forced us all to pledge to be innovative, to think differently. So just to put that out there. The second bit is around that social workforce to, under the Section 42, to coordinate that safeguarding referral process. And just for assurances that that team, Beverly has put significant investment in that team, and they are really robust, and it is quite a large team comparatively. My third comeback is around corporate leadership team. So corporate leadership team, our CLT members, again, challenged us on our safeguarding processes and what it means to us across the council corporately. So back in August, we had a CLT special edition where Beverly, the AD for Children's, did a presentation on It's Everybody's Business. And we talked to our colleagues right across the council, from planners to children's services to librarians, about reporting. and we're currently building up a platform, and myself and the AD from Children's are going around each SMT just to remind people that if you see something, say something, really back to basics, to strengthen that community safeguarding voice and internally within the councils. That's a really positive step for us. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question, because I can't see hands up at the moment. So I've got a question on the transition, Dr. Cooper. You'll sort of know that was, and it's great to see all the work that's been done on that, because that was an emphasis that we were particularly interested in. There's a couple of questions coming from that. In notes in the report on page 31 around the challenges, and that some young adults may be exploited by organised crime gangs, and there's other aspects that you've already highlighted, and it says that they might be engaged in harmful behaviours that limit their life choices. But I was just wondering if they lack that support of the family or services. Is there anything that you're looking at to see how that can be captured? Because I note that it's noted. But obviously there's a huge issue around, and I know we're sort of young people, so I'm not talking about children, but that's like young people that get sort of taken into crime. And I'm just thinking also about those, young people that might get, the drugs lines that are crossing. So is there anything that specifically that you're looking at? Because obviously that was the headline bit within it. The other one was on the violence against women and girls heading, again on the same page. And it says about there's a number of child to parent domestic abuse cases where the child is generally 18 plus. Some of these involve very high levels of harm and violence, which may have the potential to escalate to domestic homicide, which is obviously incredibly serious. At the end of that, I wasn't sure, you were saying about improving the effectiveness of support available. Is there anything you can sort of flesh out a little bit for us on that? And then under the new section, the joint adults and children's safeguarding panel jointly commissioned the experience of how engaged young adults, which may be what you're already talking about, who are the carers, to learn more about how the agencies can best support them. And is that outcomes from that what you were talking about already, the pledge that you made today? So that's my third bit around that sort of transition cohort. But Dr. Cooper, if you've got any.
I'll start, but I'll ask Vicky to help me with this because you're closer to the details. So overall, in the work that we're doing jointly across children and adult services around transitional safeguarding, we're looking to improve, and the update that we had today at the joint boards was really clear evidence of work that is being done, not only in terms of the new protocol, but making sure people understand that, but also setting up panels or for a forum maybe rather than a panel to discuss some cases. So I think your first and third question are addressed in the ongoing work that's being done jointly by Beverly Hendricks and Vicky Murphy. So I think that it's ongoing work. It's not, and in fact, somebody asked when were we going to achieve it? And I think it was quite tactful that Beverly said, well, it's really difficult to say because these are very tricky, challenging areas to try and improve system interfaces that are quite challenging. But on the second point about child on parent violence, certainly at one point during the last 2 years or so, we were seeing, the police were reporting, actually police colleagues, it was during the lockdowns, they were reporting some significant increase in that area of activity. But I have to say more recently, they're less concerned about it. So I'm looking to colleagues at the board because that's where we get our intelligence from, not just from what's reported through safeguarding, but also from what's reported by partner agencies. It is an area of concern, and I think with work on domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, it's quite important that domestic abuse is understood as not just abuse in intimate relationships, but also within families. And often this intergenerational abuse can get sort of not ignored, but not seen, as it will not seen through that domestic abuse lens. So it is an area that I personally would want to keep a focus on. Whether we need to do anything specifically in terms of addressing that, I think will emerge depending on whether we see it as an area that's not being addressed through our safeguarding processes. And for that, I would look to Vicky, because the detail of that would be through the kind of case file audit type mechanisms that understand whether those issues are being appropriately addressed in practice, because for each individual circumstance it's going to be different. So, you know, we know safeguarding by definition is complicated and painful, difficult stuff. So it's making sure that those potential areas of misunderstanding or perhaps lack of understanding rather than misunderstanding are not pitfalls that we then maybe see you know, a death. That's my worst fear. And in fact, all of this work, whether it's transitional safeguarding or the domestic abuse, I don't want a safeguarding adult review to tell us we should be doing something about it. And I think in Haringey, with the work that's being described in the report, there's some assurance that we're looking to prevent that happening by addressing some of these really tricky issues through the work that's being done as we go along. But Vicky, do come in with some of the detail.
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's important to note that I've stepped on the transitional safeguarding piece of work right at the back end, where our Director of Adult Social Services, Director of Children's Services, AD, the PSWs have been working on this for a long period of time, and it's actually nationally seen as a pioneering piece of work. So just to note the fantastic work that they've done. Secondary to that is then us putting that into practice, and those groups are set up. So myself and the Children's AD have set up systems across both children's and adults to manage some of these areas and put the groups in place to ensure that we put it into practice. So we've got a preparing for adult strategy, we've got a transition strategy. We're currently meeting next week to look at a transitions team that will work across adults and children's from the age of 14 to 25, that will be an area to host some of these issues and work together closely on driving that ambition forward. So there is a lot of work going off, but actually you've really got the buy-in from our colleagues, and as like I said, there's a real push on transforming this into a pioneering piece of work. Thank you, and thank you all for all your hard work on it.
Okay, so I haven't finished, but because I note that sometimes I forget some of my recommendations as we go through the report. But just to say that I think maybe as a panel we could recommend that in future we expand on this transition work, because obviously it is pioneering. You are putting a huge amount of effort into this. It's very innovative, but I think it would be useful for us as a panel to get a better understanding of what those groups, you know, have sort of put in place and what the outcomes of that have been, so that we can see that on the ground sort of response. Okay, so I'm looking at ground. Any questions, further questions? Okay, I've got a couple, so sorry, Dr. Cooper, you haven't quite. So I note on the new section in the report, the Homes for Haringey and the the council stock. It was really interesting because there was the housing need and homelessness was one of the areas that you were specifically focusing in on. I just wondered, because it says at the bottom of that, a key driver to strengthen the resident voice, including co-design and co-production. So I just wondered if you had an example of this, or, you know, is this something that was the ask, and this is what you're hoping to do? And on the other one around new, the patient movement to hospital discharge and designated settings. So I think it's around, so there's obviously been a huge thing in the media at the moment about people being discharged home or needing to be discharged home because of the pressures within the hospital. Do you perceive, with your knowledge, that's you know, not brought out in the report, but I think just from your own knowledge, if there's going to be any, if you have any concerns around maybe a pressure coming in onto our services in adult social care to accept people coming out, and whether that might have a risk, a safeguarding risk in the future, maybe going back into places that, you know, we just haven't had the time or the staff to be able to do everything that we need to do before discharge. So those were the two questions on the new bit, and then I've just got a couple more on data. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So around co-design and co-production, particularly around homelessness, I'd call on Jill Taylor really to give an answer to that. So maybe that's something we can ask her directly. More generally, in terms of the Safeguarding Adult Board, as I mentioned earlier and Helena referred to, I've been to the Joint Partnership Board looking at co-production of the new strategy, and I think that's really important as a board that we model at a strategic level co-production, because then I think it shows and demonstrates leadership in that sense. And I'm very grateful for the director prompting the board to take that line in terms of the new strategy. Certainly we haven't done it before. In terms of hospital discharge and risks, I suppose I wouldn't want to comment, and colleagues might be better able to comment on the current situation. But from my perspective as the independent chair of the Safeguarding Board, we have the learning from the last couple of years of COVID around inappropriate and appropriate hospital discharge and the safeguarding risks involved in that. And so I would hope and expect that that learning isn't forgotten too quickly in terms of the really challenging period that we have just been through. Having said that, we're still in a very challenging period, albeit with different challenges. But I would hope that from a safeguarding perspective, that learning is now embedded, and that the risks of inappropriate hospital discharge from a safeguarding perspective would not recur in the way that maybe we have seen it in the past. But I think colleagues are closer to these issues than me.
So I think it's, I think everybody's aware that nationally the NHS is currently full. You know, we have restrictions on flow, and we are put under immense pressure as a system to free beds so that those that need it the most have got access to those beds. In Haringey and in NCL, we're actually for me, in a really good position. So we have very small numbers of escalations comparatively to other areas. So I picked up a conversation with our Whittingham Health Group last week, and we had 6 people that were on the escalations list. My neighbouring, my old place, so I had 178. So I think we are in a better position than we think, but it's only by keeping that momentum and looking as a system on what options to discharge and coming back to the quality. So that's a key component of it. If we haven't got the quality, safeguarding will go up. And there might always be an issue where we haven't quite recognised somebody's level of need, or the acuity and demand might have been higher. But we've got teams in place, crisis response team, various community teams that can go in and respond and react to that very quickly. But just for the assurance that we do have smaller numbers within Haringey than other boroughs, so we are in a bit more of a fortuitous position. We also have the teams to respond to any safeguarding and to increase that care and support very, very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to ask my questions around the data then. So, Dr. Cooper, so on the data analysis, it said that section 42 inquiries on the Care Act are up by 32%, and there's a 22% increase in abuse in the home. So in previous years, we've looked at this in quite some detail. I'm just going to sort of ask again, is this something that you're seeing this as a change, or is this something that you're specifically wanting to be focusing in on this? Because I'm just not quite sure, if there's anything that can be done to prevent, in that sort of more preventative, proactive way around these figures, because they're obviously of concern. Thank you.
I think it's really tricky to interpret the figures, and it's very helpful that you're raising this point. The increase in section 42 inquiries potentially indicates that the concerns that are being referred are more appropriate. So when we, during COVID, the first year of COVID, there was a huge increase after the lockdown eased off nationally, and we saw it, I think, to some extent in Haringey, an increase in activity because a lot more issues were being identified, but they weren't necessarily concerns that would lead to a Section 42 inquiry. So it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It may be a reflection of actually more appropriate referrals coming in, and potentially also, because it takes some time, the delays that there had been because of the challenges of delivery of services during COVID. And I'll just reiterate Vicky's point about, I think in Haringey, the additional capacity staffing investment in the safeguarding team has been absolutely critical in terms of managing that. So it's not in itself necessarily indicating anything different or challenging. And I think what we do with data is keep an eye on it and try and understand what it's telling us. The overall increase in issues being identified at the home over a longer period of time actually reflects the shift in adult social care and people with people with care and support needs, a good shift in that they are continuing to live at home rather than move into residential and nursing care, and a pattern, particularly in this borough, of not a hugely high relative proportion of care homes. So if we were further out in the kind of donut ring around London, we would see a different profile because there would be more residents in care homes, and the earlier conversations about requiring improvement in care homes and CQC registration with registered care in care homes. The reporting does, I won't say it skews the data, it does influence the data in terms of that balance between safeguarding issues being identified in someone's own home as opposed to in a residential or nursing care home. So in itself, it's not necessarily a concern. What I rely on as the independent chair is the quality assurance subgroup to look underneath the data and report back if there are issues. So for example, at one board meeting during the year under report, we had some indications that there were increased concerns and inquiries in supported living. But actually, when the data analysts went back and looked at it and tidied up the data, it was a data issue, not a service issue. So I think why I'm giving that an example is that as a board, when we have every board meeting, the data reports, there's quite a lot of challenge and discussion. And then the deep dive is done. We've had fantastically good reporting on deep dives that then says, yes, actually, this is an issue, or no, it isn't an issue. And if it is an issue, what the issue actually is, that then the appropriate response can be made. So what you get reported in the annual report is quite high level. But I suppose I want to give the committee reassurance that that's monitored regularly through board meetings, and we do frequently require and request these more deep dives to try and understand what's going on in order to then direct a prioritised responses. And Beverly, as a member of the board, can verify that that's what we do, and quite a lot of time is spent on kind of those conversations, actually, because obviously we rely on that information to try and understand what's going on in the borough. I hope that's helpful.
No, it is, and so taking on board the deep dive in that area, and as you said, looking at the quality assurance information. So with this increase in abuse in the home, is it from, or have you got any information yet from audits that have been done, whether this is around providers going in, so in domiciliary care provision, or around family members? And if it's, I'm just thinking, if it's around a home and there's safeguarding around a particular member of staff, then that seems, but I would imagine it's a lot more difficult if you're in somebody's own home and it's a relative, or, I'm just trying to sort of unpick it a little bit more. If you haven't got the information, I'm very happy to have that information brought back, because I know I'm asking for some details, but it's just trying to work out from our residents' perspective what that actually means.
I think I'm happy to take it away and try and get, in effect, a more detailed analysis back to you from colleagues about what that actually means. Because, as I say, interpreting what the data is telling us is a art, not a science.
And I'm just going to quickly go on page 70 when you were talking about the AE. Got the A's and the P's and the R's, I think, is the, just I think I'm on A2, the audit safeguarding data. I think there's a couple of, and I think you mentioned yourself, Dr. Cooper, earlier, that there's some of these things that you put out there because you're really pushing for excellence, but sometimes things can't be met. I noticed that A2, it says that, however, this target completion won't be met, and then on A3, it's just there's quite a few not being met. On P1 on page 74, the task and finish group has not yet met. There was just a few of these, and I was just wondering if it's about resource, or it's just that there's other things that have come up that have taken priorities and sort of swapped things around. It's just really to give us an understanding of, is there anything specific that's causing this, or if it's just resources.
So hopefully some of it is fairly self-evident. So liberty protection safeguards wasn't implemented or taken forward because the government, what should I say, went up and down the mountain in terms of telling us we were going to have to implement it, and then we weren't, and then we were, and we weren't. I mean, we have had ongoing conversations about that at the board meeting. So there's an external reason why, and similarly with P2, which was about engagement with service users and carers, that had been very challenging during the 2 years of COVID, and we're just now looking at how do we, and the meeting that I went to today is a sort of first attempt to try and come out of that. So I think the reason for non-delivery on some of the ambitions has quite, reasonable explanations. Yes, also there is a resource issue. I think in terms of all partner agencies being incredibly stretched, the impact of COVID, both in terms of working practices and people being off sick or looking after family members or whatever who've been unwell, has had a sort of, and being exhausted, I think it's fair to say the workforce across the board for a period of time during this particular period, there was a lot of exhaustion. So I think that mitigates the sort of, it's not an excuse. There are reasons why, there are valid reasons why. Yes, I would always want to be more ambitious. Yes, I'm frustrated about not being able to achieve, but the partnership is only the sum total of the partners and their capacity and capability to deliver work. So as I say, I think in the introduction, I think that huge sterling work has been done by all partners, and almost, if it doesn't sound too trite, standing still is progress, given the challenges in adult social care in terms of the market, in terms of resources, in terms of staffing. I'm talking at a national picture in terms of the challenges around reform. I want to be not generous, but acknowledge that the challenges, and Vicky mentioned the challenges for our NHS colleagues, to acknowledge the challenges that everybody's working with and be reasonable, but at the same time try and push, because that is my job, to try and push for an ambitious strategic plan that I'm also well aware we're never going to achieve 100%, but let's go for it and do what we can with the resources and despite the challenges that people are facing.
Thank you, because we've had discussions before about resources and partners and in that, so I just thought I'd bring that up. The last one I had is on modern slavery. On page 83, I was just trying to unpick this because it said previously, January 2021, the adult safeguarding team had received 22 reports of modern slavery concerns. However, under this section, it says there's a potential. So there's the 800. I think it was talking about the costs. Producing a cost-benefit analysis that estimated there to be 858 potential victims of modern slavery in Haringey. So those two figures were so different. I just thought, hang on, what's going on here? So I don't know over what period the 22 potential victims were reported from January. I don't know how far that went, but it just seems so different. Can you just sort of give me an understanding of why we think there are so many potential victims, but yet actually we've only had safeguarding reports into a very small amount comparatively?
I think that, I mean, this could be a whole meeting around modern day slavery, quite frankly. I think the short answer is we're still not, as a whole society, seeing what's right in front of our eyes. And that's why the awareness raising and the training and work done to raise awareness wherever with any partner is so important. This data has come from colleagues who specialise in this area of work, and I think it is quite shocking, and I think it's good that it's quite shocking, because I think there's still a lot of denial, as it were, that this is something that's going on underneath our very noses. So with that in mind, I would also say that addressing the issues of, or understanding and addressing issues of modern day slavery isn't an exclusive remit of the Safeguarding Adults Board. It's something that's jointly shared across a number of partnerships, including the Community Safety Partnership. And so that's why it's important that we have it on our agenda and we recognise it and try and improve awareness within the partnership around modern slavery. But it's not something that we necessarily have the right levers to resolve overnight, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you. I think because time is pressing, and as you said, that probably could take up an entire meeting. I think one of the recommendations that I'd like to suggest from the panel would be a focus on modern slavery. As the recommendation we made around the transitions previously, I think this one for me, it seems like a hidden in plain sight almost. And I think in Haringey, I think that's something we need to be incredibly aware of and focused on. So you mentioned actually, though, working with the Community Safety Partnership. So I'm just wondering, in the same way we had the Ukraine bit, which was almost like a joint bit, we're not expecting it just to come from your reports, Dr. Cooper, but we would also like a report that sort of dovetails in with the community safety partnerships, so that we can get a better understanding as councillors what's happening on the ground in Haringey. So if that could be a focus, I think we would, I'm looking to my colleagues, yes, really appreciate that. Thank you so much. That is an enormous report. There's a huge amount of information in it. Honestly, I could spend hours talking about this with you, but I won't, because I know it's been a very long day and my colleagues here would rebel as well. So, but thank you. And there's a huge amount of good that's gone in this, and I'm really sorry we just don't have the time to discuss the good. I wish we did. But so I just want to say thank you so much to everyone that's participated in this. It's been really interesting to hear, particularly around the transition work, and really, really keen to hear about that going forward. But thank you so much. And I'm going to close down that part of the agenda item. Yep. OK, thank you. OK, so thank you very much. We're moving on to the final part of our agenda, which is the dementia services. And we've got Paul Allen here to present. Paul, as you'll know by now, we only have like a minute or two from yourself and then time for colleagues to ask questions. So if you'd like to introduce yourself and the report, and then we'll go into questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I didn't introduce myself last time, so apologies. It's Paul Allen. I'm Head of Integrated Commissioning for Older People and Frailty for NCL ICB and also the Council as well. So part of my kind of remit is to kind of think about commissioning jointly some of the kind of dementia solutions that we've got in place. So the report itself talks through the process around kind of dementia and how you get a diagnosis around dementia, because that's not a straightforward thing for many people. It is a specialist area, and talks, I think, about the importance of a couple of things, which I just want to highlight within the report. One of which is making sure that we get people as early as possible to get diagnosed with the condition, and the right condition as well. which isn't by no means straightforward. And that starts with the GP, and it isn't just about the GPs identifying those people in the kind of that, you know, amongst their patient list. They also have to kind of to obviously to engage with those communities and residents as well, because people themselves don't always recognise that they've got cognitive impairment. It is one of the conditions where people really worry about as you get over 50. It's the condition that people worry about more than anything else, like cancer or CVD, around kind of acquiring the condition. The other point I wanted to raise within the report really is the importance of listening to kind of patients and residents. So within the report, I think we've been quite honest in saying actually there are a number of areas of improvement that we could make around this. And we know that because we're listening to patients and residents. And I have the kind of the privilege of chairing the dementia reference group. And we've had some really interesting conversations, very open about where do we want to focus our efforts on. Big effort was actually post-diagnostic support for people with dementia following the memory service, which is the specialist area. So that's one of the key areas that we wanted to focus on, and we were making, the report outlines all the efforts we're making in that area to try and identify some of the kind of the solutions we want to put in place, because we want to develop a network of solutions around dementia, so that people don't feel they're isolated post-diagnosis, and we want to kind of make sure that people feel that that support is available, and we're feeding back and saying this is the support that's available. Can we make better use of the Haynes Day Centre, for example, to be a kind of a specialist hub and spoke kind of model within the community? And I think we've got one or two specialist areas that are doing really well, like our multi-agency care and coordination team to support people with frailty, which includes dementia. And we've already mentioned the enhanced health and care homes. And as John said previously, about 70% of people in those care homes have got dementia of different stages. So some of the support is improved in some of those areas, but we've still got a long way to go. So I'm just going to pause there because no doubt there'll be some questions from everybody within the report.
Okay, thanks. Before I take questions, do you want to put the slide up about the services in the borough? Because that was one question that we asked, and I know you've got that up as a slide. So, and then I'll start with Councillor Brennan first this time, and then Councillor Bella. So.
I have a question from page 14. It says, try that. Okay. Is that better? Try again. It says here, greater proportion of people from Black and Asian ethnicities have dementia than white groups. And I'm just thinking, is there some reason for that? Because I don't understand it. Why would that be? That doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I don't understand it.
Yeah, so it is true there is a genetic component to your likelihood or otherwise of actually acquiring particular conditions, and this is one of those areas where there does seem to be some evidence that there's a greater proportion of people. What I would like just to mention on some of those issues is that there is also, I think probably equally importantly, less likelihood of some particular underserved communities and groups coming forward for a diagnosis. And there's a complicated set of reasons around that we're trying to get into the kind of the midst of. So one of the things that we have agreed to do and funded is a dementia coordinator to work with some of the communities to raise awareness around cognitive impairment as well.
I mean, I just have trouble. I have trouble with the idea that there's a genetic component to it. I believe there must be something more to do with society and the way that it's being diagnosed, or what's happened to people in their early lives. I would like more proof.
So I think, Paul, the question is there medical, not for you to answer, but for, is there sort of a medical thing that you could send us a link to around that? But I think actually the second part of that question is the bit, and you said about the dementia coordinator. Is that coordinator going to sort of be based and specifically looking to work with those groups that may be not coming forward? If you've already identified them, that's great. So I missed that bit in the report. So yeah.
So absolutely, that's right. It's exactly what it's intended to do. So just to clarify what I meant by that statement within the report, this is about the what's called the epidemiological kind of prevalence of dementia, which means it's whether you're diagnosed or not. It's perfectly possible for one of us to have dementia, but we're not diagnosed formally. The actual stats in there are about that actually some groups within society have a higher level of epidemiological prevalence than other groups. It's a bit like, I think that's true of learning disabilities as well for some of the groups, for example. So, but your point's absolutely right, Councillor. Actually, some of those groups, Black African, Black Caribbean groups, or one particular group, are less likely to come forward for a diagnosis, and that's the key thing that we need to address.
So we'll get a link sent, if possible, around the medical aspect of it, so that Councillor Brennan and we can just have a look. But I think for us, the important bit is about how the coordinator was going to be, or the dementia facilitator, did you say?
So I'm glad to say that we're investing in a dementia coordinator, because I want that coordinator to do other things as well, and to mobilise some of the community aspects of support. But we are also putting a bid in for a dementia facilitator. That's a different role. That role is to work with GPs to better understand why the diagnosis rates are lower, to work with them to improve that, alongside the dementia coordinator as well. So we think actually some of the issues to do with the diagnosis are partly about people not necessarily coming forwards. Maybe GP practice, because they've got to manage an awful lot of conditions, needs to improve in that area. So that's something that we are beginning to address at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Well, it'd be really useful to hear back at some point about how that is progressing with our GP colleagues, and that would be interesting for the panel to get some sort of report back on, Paul, from you at a later stage. Councillor Peacock.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. It's okay. No, that's all right. I've completely missed it.
Go for it, and then I can speak. Okay. Paul, I attend Winkfield, the centre. Do you know it?
Yes.
Yeah. And I go to the dementia meetings there, and there was a really excellent one where a man was talking us through lots of slides to explain the onset of dementia and how we can respond to the various aspects of it. And I've got him coming to my pensioners group in the January. It's really, really important. Now, today, Wednesday and Thursdays, I dedicate to looking after somebody with dementia. And I've noticed that it's changing. Yes. Today, he was laughing insanely on all sorts of aspects. He was just laughing and laughing. And I asked somebody else who's looking after someone with dementia, and they said it's progressive, and it does change. Now, I take him for swimming in Finchley Lydon, but we don't have a similar facility in the borough, and I'd like to see if you could possibly arrange for there to be swimming lessons, swimming for people with dementia, because I've seen how beneficial it is.
Yeah. So you've raised a really good point. Just two things I want to pick up really quickly, if it's okay. Absolutely right, it is progressive, sadly, but people can have a good quality of life for many years if they're diagnosed early enough and get the right treatment and access to interventions. You've also hit a nail on the head about one particular part of it, which is part of that treatment isn't just about the medication regime, that's important, but it's also about keeping yourself physically and mentally active as well. And so we've invested in a number of different areas in that as part, and the report talks about some of the things we've done in terms of building up community assets. One, not so much on swimming, but we've done things like walking programs for people with dementia and things like that as well. And we need to build up that. So yeah, I will be in touch to pick your brains if that's okay about ideas you may have.
Today I was at Alexandra Palace for Singing for the Brain.
Yeah.
And yesterday I took him to the Park Theatre in Finsbury Park again singing with dementia. Yeah. And there's big groups, and I've managed to get one of our care homes, the Renko House, now online. So when we have the programme of singing, I've now got 2 other homes linking in and enjoying the same thing. So it's really good, and they really enjoy it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Abella, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You've mentioned a few times now the importance of early diagnosis for dementia. And in the notes we received before this meeting in paragraph 2.11, you mentioned that there was a drop in the diagnostic rate during the pandemic. And I was wondering, firstly, what are the medium-term consequences, and are we still feeling the consequences of that drop in the diagnostic rate during the pandemic? And secondly, are we now at a place where we are diagnosing people on time, or are we still feeling the consequences or the backlog of the pandemic?
Yeah, they're excellent points. And what I would say is we are still dealing with the consequences of the pandemic in terms of people not being diagnosed, perhaps not coming forward for help, feeling isolated and so forth as well. So my general sense at the moment is that people are coming forward later than we would want them to, certainly, which means that the interventions that they can kind of identify to support them aren't as effective, or aren't as effective for as long, if you like. So it is an issue. There are issues in terms of the kind of the availability of the workforce during that pandemic around it, which I've been honest in the report and said that was an issue. And that is something that we are addressing at the minute. So you'll see something in the report about getting some of the basics right around assessments, for example, whether that's a social care assessment or whether it's a health assessment. We're still recovering from that position, which is why we really want to put a big emphasis on supporting kind of individuals over the course of the next few months, because I think there's a lot we can do and a lot we can improve in this area.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Just to follow on from that. So epidemiologically, you're saying that we are underdiagnosing. Do we know for our population in Haringey, what sort of numbers? You're saying 2,200 diagnosed now. What sort of numbers should we really be diagnosing in our population in this borough?
Thanks. Nail on the head. We actually, the 2,200 I've referenced is actually the epidemiological number. So that's the total number of people likely to have dementia. We think we actually have identified about 2/3 of them. Now, Camden, for example, has got a higher position than that. It's upwards of about 80%, which is, I think, probably the kind of the benchmark really for us. We ought to be, there's always going to be some people who have got very early stages of dementia that we're not going to be able to recognise, or they themselves aren't going to recognise some of the kind of the issues. But there is still more we can do. And even within that 67%, could I hand on heart say those people have been diagnosed at an early stage? No, I couldn't. So yeah, there's a bit more to be done in this area.
Could I have a follow on? Just to follow on from that, if that is the case, what are we doing locally to raise awareness of this? Or are there lessons to be learned from other boroughs who are maybe diagnosing earlier?
Yeah, and so that's what we've done. Some of the key investments we want to put in place are things like that dementia coordinator. So this is partly going into communities to support and raise awareness around dementia. So some communities, for example, don't necessarily understand cognitive impairment, mental health, and dementia. It's kind of there are some kind of key issues in the understanding of that. So it is really important to make sure that we've got some support opportunities like the Wingfield Centre we've mentioned to kind of talk about dementia, not everybody knows the kind of the symptoms and signs of it. And actually, conversely, people worry about being forgetful and think, oh gosh, what does that mean if I'm older? So that's absolutely right. On the other side, we also want to work with our GPs because it is kind of a nice guidelines, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, to identify, to go through a kind of, the GPs will try and rule everything out before they kind of give that terrible diagnosis, or say maybe you need to go to the memory service to do some of those work. So there's a variety of things we can do which are on the community side and on improving our kind of GPs. And one of the things that we want to do, for example, with working our primary care team and the integrated care board, is to target those GP practices who maybe their levels of diagnosis are a bit lower, and explore why that is, and have those conversations both with them and the surrounding community. But part of that is also about educating individuals and also organisations to do a bit more, not just health and care organisations, but retail organisations, lawyers, barbers, services, just to make sure that their services are better attuned to people with dementia, but also they can spot some of the signs of people, like somebody coming to you frequently to do various transactions or whatever. Is that a warning sign? What would you do in that position? So there's a lot we can do in that area.
Just a final point, if you don't mind. Dementia does not just affect people who above the age of 65. There are a small proportion who are below that. So just want the council not to forget that actually there are people out there who are much younger, and just to ensure that we don't forget that.
I mean, that's an excellent point. And we've one of our members of our dementia reference group is somebody who's caring for somebody with early onset dementia, and they will remind us of that group. It is a small group. It is a disparate group. People with learning disabilities and Down syndromes, for example, have got a greater likelihood of acquiring dementia. But there are also other groups of individuals as well. So we are putting in place some of the conversations and strategies around that, because those individuals may live for quite a while, and actually it's one of the most difficult kind of groups to kind of manage if you're a carer.
I've had Councillor Peacock also indicate.
You mentioned the Haynes building, and it's excellent. Yes, I've visited it many times, but we had one in Tottenham, and I feel very sad that we've only got the one now in Hornsey, and that was at the Grange, and it's still empty. Is there any possibility that we could have a facility in Tottenham?
Paul, at this point, could you just put the slides up on the provision across the borough?
Yeah. I was going to hope, Dominic could help with that. Yes. And we've kind of constructed this from some of the updates. So my colleagues in adult social care pulled this together. Some of the opportunities we've got are clearly. I think you're referring to the Grace Centre. Was that right? Oh, sorry, no, it was the Grange. Yeah. So I think the Grange Centre was something that we've been talking about within adult social care for a while pre-pandemic.
Not the Grace. Grange.
Yeah, the Grange. Sorry, that's my accent. Yeah, I did say I said the Grace first and then the Grange. Yeah. So we have got a number of areas that's listed down there that are scattered across the different areas. Now, some of that are due to as part of the refurbishment for the Grace, for example. So there will be an alternative identified. But yeah, your point's well made about not just relying on one site within the kind of the borough, but actually having a range of sites around.
Sorry, the Grace Centre used to be in my ward that I represented, so I visited it quite often. In fact, they've just invited me to their Christmas dinner, which I've been going to for the last 20 years. But the Grange was in White Hart Lane, and it was a proper facility for people with dementia and mental health problems. And that was closed down a few years ago, which was very sad. And it's closed down the same time as the Wellborn one, the one in Northfield Gardens as well. And that bit then became an enablement centre, and I don't know what it is now. But I'm just really concerned because a lot of the people with mental health problems and dementia don't want to travel all the way up to Haynes. And often their carer is elderly, and it makes it a problem as well.
I mean, I'm looking at Beverly and Vicky here, but I mean, we are cognizant of that kind of geographical split, which is why I've highlighted that they're in 3 different localities. So, Vicky and Beverly, sorry, do you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, so I was just going to reference the Grange, which, you know, you hold in quite high esteem. If you recall, that was closed at the time of the council's response to the austerity measures that were put in place. So what this slide shows is the areas we're actually working on across the borough. The Haynes, of course, you're familiar with. What's on offer at the Cypriot Centre and also the Grace. So I'm distinguishing the Grace from the Grange and what the plans are there. So we are acknowledging that that's an important resource to have in different parts of the borough. And this slide just outlines where we are in terms of progress.
Because I've known Grace for so many years, and I know that basically it's a religious organisation, and they pump religion into it all the time, and lots of their clients are not of that religion or are not religious in any shape or form, and I find it quite disturbing. And I hear that they're moving to the Irish Centre and which has upset me really badly. And the hall is going to be like a church. So yes, they want to use it as a church because they use the Grace Centre also as a church. So it has other problems in there, and I just.
So
I know that some of my pensioners ended up going there when the Grange was closed down, and I managed to get them into various things, and they were put in the Grace, and they weren't happy. They weren't happy with the emphasis on religion.
So I think the question obviously is coming up because we've got the Centre of Excellence in the Haynes, which is obviously, you know, the Centre of Excellence for dementia care. And then we're looking at to have a replica, you know, in the east of the borough. And I noticed you've got the Grace that's going into the Irish Centre. So is there any sort of clarity around, is there going to be a new dementia centre of excellence in the old Irish Centre? And if so, is that going to be incorporated as part of the Grace, or is it going to be separate? Well, I thought, just check.
So it is one and the same. They are not 2 separate sort of agencies within the Irish Centre. That will be a day centre for older people. The physical building is being designed to dementia standards, and I think that's really important just in terms of how the refit or refurb is carried out. Obviously, we are in conversations with the Grace in terms of our expectations in terms of the service delivery. Those conversations continue. I'm not able to respond to what Councillor Peacock has said because I'm not aware that that's the offer. You know, a church within the day centre. I'm not aware of that, but I'm happy to take that away and obviously come back with some kind of reassurance once I'm able to respond to that. I'm certainly not aware.
So not picking up on that particular area that we will come back and work with. So we did talk about trying to put some numbers against people with dementia that access services, and I did try to do that. So we highlighted some of the services that were pioneering, some that were really on track and were innovative in that section. But I just wanted to be mindful that we have a full range of services that people still choose to go into rather than this type of service. So that we have a lot of residents that are choosing direct payments, that are choosing alternative mechanisms by choice. So it was quite a difficult task for me to do. What I can share with you is the enormity of the the services that are provided across mental health for specific cohorts, that is available. But to narrative it down, we picked up earlier around the dementia and the types, and it's such an enormous span of early onset, vascular, frontal, a wide range, and corticops. It goes across such a wide span, and each one of those is different treatment, different fluctuations. And to identify services to meet all them is going to be quite difficult, but we'll really have a go at it. The Haynes at the minute has only got 18 people in there, but we've got 17 people going through that compatibility. So as you can imagine, it's really important that the team in there does that one-to-one work to ensure that not only is that right for that individual, but it's right for the individuals that are in there as well, because we can't end up in safeguarding because we haven't done the work effectively. So we are really pushing forward with the dementia parent deliverer and looking at every option to meet service need, but it would be across a wide range of services.
Sorry to keep coming back, but nobody in the borough knows the Irish Centre like I do, because I was chair of it for many, many years, and also I organised food Monday, Wednesdays and Fridays. And when I heard that Grace was going to move over, I wanted them to take on that aspect so that people who are vulnerable could drop in and have a lunch. And I thought because they cook for their people every day, we could increase it to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, which is an aspect that pensioners still ask me. When can we go back to the Irish Centre? When can we have food at a price that we can afford? And perhaps you could take that aspect up for us. I'd be really grateful.
I think because that's going a bit off the dementia thing. I think if we could take that and come, as long as, yes, obviously, but there will be other people as well. I think it's a wider cohort, isn't it? So I think if you could come back with some figures
Just to
on
be
that.
clear, that's the luncheon club that used to be at the Irish Centre. It wasn't a dementia specific offer.
No, people used to come with their carers. They would come, yeah, with their carers, and also the Renko House used to bring in their people as well, and it was quite good for those people to have that.
I think that's really clear. So I think if we could just take that back and yeah, come back with you to you on with that information, I think that'd be really helpful. I think for myself, I think just understanding a bit more about the offer that's going into the Irish Centre. I know obviously that's obviously in progress at the moment, but if you've got any more information on that, I think as a committee it'd be really helpful for us to understand that, just because obviously there is always that, well, we've got the Haynes, but what about, you know, so I think if there's a new offer coming in and the Irish Centre is going to be revamped in order to, you know, facilitate that, I think that'd be really helpful for us to be aware of. And then to Paul, a recommendation, I think, so you've had some really, you know, the A to G, E, H, no, A to H, oh no, it goes down to I. So they came from patients and carers, which was the on page 17, which the very specific asks around what could be done, what could be, you know, really good to support them. And I know you also said G was one that they actually said that was the most important priority for them. So I was just wondering, you're doing this through the Aging Well board, is that correct? So obviously you're doing this as a, you know, you're going to be using co-production within this. I think I missed, I think there's probably some reference there that I haven't quite remembered. But is there a way of sort of giving us as a committee an understanding of how you're going to be using the people that you've already engaged with to help you co-produce in some of the work, particularly going on? I know there's some very important key points in this. So is it possible to come back with an update at a time that you think would be appropriate so that we can find out how this is progressing alongside the carers and the patients you've already had that initial discussion with? Because it's exciting. You've got that first bit and you've already got some ideas in there and you've already got some, you know, things about what you're going to be doing. But I think really just a sort of a wider understanding from our perspective, how you're liaising, you're co-producing that with your patients and carers, as you've already said, would be really helpful. And a timescale for that, if you could let us if you've got any ideas, thanks.
Yeah, so we've already co-produced quite a bit of work, both pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. So the pathway in Appendix 1 of the report was co-produced to start with, and a lot of deal behind it. And then along came COVID. So we kind of started that work, had a lie it down, and then we've picked it up again. So everything that we're doing, we kind of engage with as many people as possible. So I welcome the conversation around, for example, the Wingfield Centre and talking around dementia, for example. But the key group in that space is often the dementia reference group, where it seems to be quite vibrant at the moment in terms of attracting people. And we've done, I think one of the reasons for that is because we've kind of done a you said we did kind of style approach in terms of having those conversations co-production. So I mean, as I said to the group, all we've got to do now is deliver on the things we've said we were going to do. So we think we can have quite a dynamic process, and maybe come back and say 6 months, so you could kind of judge whether we've made progress on a number of areas or not, and could see what we want to do next.
I think that. Oh, apologies. Helena's got a question. I can't see it because we've got the dementia services up. But yes, I'll take that as that would be really great if we could have that back to the committee in 6 months. I think it's really important. You know, you've got that work with carers already and people that are using the services. So it'd be really helpful to see how that progresses. Helen, you're coming to us sideways, but don't let that deter you. Please ask your question.
I don't think it matters. Paul will manage. Paul, I just wanted to ask you, you were talking, when you were talking about the dementia services, of how important it was that people with dementia could go and use things like the park theatre, swimming, etc., singing especially. And I just wondered how much of that has gone into informing the people that do social prescribing, and how easy is it for people to know about that? Because I would like to see that that's been connected up as well.
Yeah, I'll be brief about this. I mean, I'll obviously give you a fiver in the post, Helen, for asking that question, because the answer to that is we're preparing an Ageing Well training and awareness pack, one element of which is about dementia. So we want to kind of encourage as many of the social prescribers and community navigators that we've got. We've got over 170 people in this space in Haringey to come forward and learn a bit more about dementia. Some of that we want them to be dementia friends. Some of them we want to be more expert and champions. So you've got a dedicated network of people who can mutually support each other. And the example I've got from the report talks about our navigation network, NavNet. The example I would give is somebody who was a Somali speaker, who was a community activist, came across somebody with cognitive impairment, and then connected up with another navigator who's a dementia navigator specialist. Because obviously the Somali community navigator knew a lot about the Somali community, the dementia navigator knew a lot about dementia, and they are able to manage that person and get an early diagnosis. So absolutely right that people need to be trained, but we can't expect everybody to be experts in everything in that navigation network. So it's the idea of having friends, people who can spot signs, and then the idea of having champions as well, and giving sufficient training for both groups around what to do next, because that's the key thing, isn't it? What do you do next for those people?
Thank you. Helena, is there a follow-up to that? I'm almost moving sideways now to just look at you.
I don't know what to do about that. Shall I kind of go like...
No, that's fine.
There's no follow-up. I'm just pleased to hear that people like Reach and Connect and the navigators are involved, because that's the whole point about joined up thinking.
Okay, thank you. So we've made one recommendation already around the, we've got some actions come back. We've also got the recommendation around the report, and Paul's kindly said in 6 months to sort of actually how this has progressed, because I think that's going to be really exciting and really interesting for councillors to sort of understand and see. Are there any other recommendations that anyone would like to make on that report? Sorry? Right, I'll leave that as an action with Paul, I think, to come back on that. Yes, to organise. Okay, so but thank you. Thank you, Paul. That's it from us. We've still got our work agenda item to go. So I'm sorry we've got to stay just a little bit longer. But thank you, Paul. And that's that part of the meeting. Okay.
The lady that left, she was from the public?
So I wasn't, she didn't introduce herself to
No,
me, so I'm.
it was, it's Asha Toure, and her husband had dementia, so I just wondered if she was going to speak about anything.
Anyway, okay. So we're still in the public part of the meeting. So we're just going to discuss the work programme update, pages 95 to 98. So Dominic, do you want to just quickly go through that for us? Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, do you want us to leave?
Well, you're more than welcome to sit through the work update.
No, just.
You know, I wouldn't, you know, prevent you from doing that. So, but yes, thank you.
So this is just in relation to the work plan, which is on page 95 of the main agenda pack. So there's two main issues really, which was the future meetings. So we've got the March meeting where we had the cabinet member questions, and then we also got an update on integrated joint partnership working. And I think we also discussed earlier on, we discussed a possible update on aids and adaptations, which could go to that meeting as well, but we can obviously discuss that. And then the other thing was just about the forthcoming scrutiny review on adult social care services. So we've still got to I put the main topics that we think we're going to need to have in there on page 95. So it's just an opportunity for any further input on that before we put it to officers and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for approval. So that was the basic points on that were delays to care assessments, issues around care packages, discharge from hospital, and links between social care and mental health services.
Just be very brief, these issues came up from the Scrutiny Cafe, so they're the ones that we're specifically focusing in on. We've got some dates already penciled in after, I think, in the new year around officer engagement. However, we do want to speak to carers and groups and others. So if anyone's got any sort of suggestions about groups, can you just please email Dominic, because we would really, really like to speak to people before we break for Christmas, the Christmas holidays, because, you know, I think it would be really great to get what matters to them in the same way like the dementia report had that. So what people really want from this, and then to be able to go to officers and say, look, this is what we've heard from, you know, from our residents. These are the issues. So though we've got the headlines, what's underneath it, and what also are we asking people to sort of think, well, this is how I would like to see this. You know, this is what I would like if, as a resident and as a user of services, this is my concerns, and this is how I would like it. Sort of, you know, so if we could work together on. So if you've got any, I've got a couple in mind. I've sent those to Dominic, but if anyone else has got any other sort of thoughts, then please do. Helena, if you've got any thoughts. Ali, I know we come to the Joint Partnership Board a lot, so I was thinking maybe we wouldn't necessarily, you know, go straight into that again, but if there's any other groups that you would like us to sort of engage with, then please just, you know, come forward. We might well be doing with the Joint Partnership Board. I think we've just, you know, it's good to make sure we've looked at lots of different groups as well in the borough. Councillor Peacock.
Can I send you an email address of two carers, particularly the lady who was just here? Asha Toure. Yeah.
Aisha's actually on the carers reference group, Sheila.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, she's also one of my pensioners, and Stephen Whittle.
So I think, and so if you just literally email Dominic, I think that would be the best way, because then we can capture it, because otherwise sometimes it gets lost, doesn't it, in these. But if anyone's got any thoughts, anyone's got any groups, you know, that they think specifically would like to come and speak to us and give their perspective on their concerns and issues, then we would be really grateful to get some feedback, or just speak to your fellow councillor colleagues and ask them and say, look, you know, this is what we're doing. Have you got anyone you want us to speak to? So I think that'd be really helpful. And that's to close. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.